I'm Ruchika Sharma and welcome to the first episode of Eyeshadow and Etihaas. I'm so excited, you guys. Eyeshadow and Etihaas, as I like to intellectualize it, is a passion project that brings together my love for eyeshadow, which, if my eyeshadow hoard is anything to go by, is literally bordering on obsession, you guys. Let's not call it. And my deep love for Etihaas, which is history. The format is pretty simple. I'll be discussing tidbits about history as I blend and perfect my eyeshadows. For anyone interested, I'll be providing names of important sources on the topic in the description box, which you could use not only to check all that I blabber over here, but also for a bit of an extra reading in case whatever I speak here sparks your curiosity on the subject. And lastly, before I go ahead and start working on my eyelids, let me introduce myself and hopefully give you decent enough reasons as to why you should sit there and listen to me talk about history. I'm Ruchika Sharma. Yeah, I already said that. And I teach history for a living. I'm currently pursuing my doctorate in history from Center for Historical Studies, JNU. Yeah, you didn't hear that. Previously, I've also done my MPhil and Masters in history, also from the Center for Historical Studies, JNU. Yeah, you still can't hear that. See how smart? Now that you've heard all that you're supposed to hear and are still here, see what I did there? Here. Let me quickly tell you what we'll be discussing in today's episode of Eyeshadow and Etihaas. Today we'll talk about a monument which is really close to my heart, since I literally grew up gazing at it from my rooftop. The Qutb Minar, which is now being called by some random names like the Dhruv Stambh, the Vishnu Stambh. Like, who even comes up with these names? I am literally this meme every time I hear the Qutb Minar being called the Dhruv Stambh. So I was like, not on my watch, I'ma clear the air while putting on some brilliant blue eye makeup, because this is blue and I'm one of those matching kind of girls. Chilling here. The Qutb Minar is 238 feet and 1 inches in height, 47 feet and 3 inches in diameter at the base, and 9 feet at the summit. The Minar, built by Qutbuddin Aibak, stands to the left of a congregational mosque, which is also built by Aibak. Qutbuddin Aibak was a military slave of Muizzuddin Khur, also known as Muizzuddin Sam, also known as Muhammad Huri. And Aibak came to acquire Delhi, which frankly wasn't his first choice. Which makes sense. Now don't get me wrong, I am as fierce a Delhiwala as anyone else is. But let's be honest here. Delhi is boringly plain, which gives it absolutely zero advantage over the approaching enemy. Its climate is extremely dry, very hot in summers, very cold in winters, with little or no rain in between. That frankly makes Delhi also not very particularly good for agriculture. Zero fertility. Aibak actually wanted Lahore, which was under the control of another one of Muizzuddin's slave, a person called Taj al-Din Yildiz. And Aibak wasn't going to settle that easily. So he did fight, but in vain, a couple of times to get Lahore, but just couldn't. So he settled for Delhi. I know it doesn't sound very nice, but Delhi was actually the accidental capital of the subcontinent. And even though Aibak made Delhi his capital out of sheer majburi, many rulers after Aibak continued to keep Delhi as their capital simply because of its symbolic value. So, by 1196-1197 AD, Aibak had built a Jama Masjid and a Minar next to it. The Minar served a very interesting function. It served as a Mazina, which is basically a tower where the Muazzin would go up and call for the Azan, which is basically a call for prayer. But during Aibak's time, the Minar was left largely unfinished. Only about 1.5 stories of the Minar were built. Aibak ex-military slave, his son-in-law, and also his successor, a person called Shamsuddin Altamash or Shamsuddin Iltutmish, was the person who added the next layer to Qutb Minar's history. He added considerable height to the Minar by adding at least 3 stories to it. The next layer of history to the Qutb was added by another Delhi Sultan, a person called Alauddin Khilji. Alauddin Khilji's reputation precedes him. He's somebody who needs no introduction in the subcontinent, but I'm still going to try. Alauddin Khilji was a man of many firsts. He was the first person to have forayed and conquered the southern kingdoms of Mabar, Tilang, Warangal, Deogir, etc., as well as the western kingdoms of Gujarat and Chittor. He was also the first person to have introduced the uniform taxation system, which was based on the measurement of land, with the tax demand collected and levied in cash. All of these things are pretty cool, you guys, and I will have to probably make another video to talk more about it. Alauddin Khilji was also the first ruler to have danced and sung Khali Bali Ho Gaya Hai Dil, Duniya Se Mera Khali Bali Ho Gaya Hai Dil. No, he didn't. Amir Khusro, the man who among many other things gave us the Hindustani classical. Yes, all your Bada Khayal, Chota Khayal, Tarana, Thumri, all courtesy Amir Khusro. Now Amir Khusro, in his Tarikh-e-Alai, which was a history written for Alauddin Khilji, tells us that Alauddin Khilji made plenty of renovations to the Qutb. Apart from building a gorgeous doorway to the mosque known as the Alai Darwaza, Khilji also extensively repaired the Minar and extended the mosque. And as if this wasn't enough, Khilji also started an ambitious project called the Alai Minar, which was supposed to surpass the Qutb in terms of its height as well as its width. But this is all that Khilji could complete before he died. And no one else took up this ambitious project. Yet, this story alone tells us that if completed, this Minar would have been considerably taller and wider than the Qutb Minar. Ibn Battuta, a Moroccan traveller, further informs us in his Rihla, which was a travelogue that he wrote when he travelled to many places, including India, that renovations to the Minar and the mosque were also carried out by Muhammad bin Tughlaq, another Sultan of Delhi. Of course you know Muhammad Tughlaq, the pioneer of demonetization, the man who shifted his capital from Delhi to Daulatabad and then to Delhi again. Yeah, you know him. However, the most significant changes to the Minar were actually carried out by Firoz Tughlaq. During Firoz's time, lightning struck the Minar, causing it great damage. So, Tughlaq carried out repairs by ordering the 4th story of the Minar to be reduced and an additional, a 5th story to be added to it. Both these stories were made in white marble. Another set of repairs were done in 1503 by Sikandar Lodi, the Lodi Sultan of Delhi, who, in an inscription on the Minar, is credited to have filled in cracks and loose joints in the upper stories of the Minar. The Minar in this sense is a palimpsest, carrying imprints of many successive time periods. The complexity of the Qutb, however, was completely turned on its head when the British came to write about it. But before we talk about that, know that the British were so fascinated by the Qutb Minar that they actually went ahead and added a 6th story to it. Built by a person called Robert Smith of the Royal Engineers, the addition to the Qutb was so hideous that Smith's own contemporaries asked him to take it down. Small mercies. And now, of course, it stands next to the Qutb in a pavilion and is called as the Smith's Folly. But back to the colonial historiography. The British in India looked at its history largely through the lens of religion, wherein its monuments were often identified by the religion of its builders or its patrons. Yes, they literally classified monuments based on religion. Now, not only did this heavily simplify the very complex history of the subcontinent, but it also invisibilized an intermingling of its varied architectural forms. It is in the middle of this milieu that the origins of the Qutb Minar were debated upon by the British. One person that willingly participated in this debate was a person called Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Now, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, like me, was a fierce Dilliwala who graduated from the most elite educational institution of its time, the Delhi College, which is this building, and I will reserve plenty more deets about the Delhi College for another video. Having learned smart stuff, Sir Syed wrote a book on the history of Delhi titled Asar-us-Sanadid. In this book, he initially attributed the origins of the Qutb Minar to Qutbuddin Aibak. Sir Syed even went ahead and gave a detailed description of all the inscriptions pertaining to Iltutmish, Firoz Tughlaq and Sikandar Lodi which had been inscribed on the Qutb Minar. But in 1852, Sir Syed presented a paper to the Archaeological Society of Delhi, wherein he flipped a complete 180 and described the Minar as a structure that predated the coming of Qutbuddin Aibak. एकदम से हालात बदल दिए, जज्बात बदल दिए. Why he do that? I don't know, man. I don't know. Well, actually, I do know. Sir Syed, like many other intellectual elites of India at that point of time, really bought wholesale into this idea of modernity and scientific progress that the British advertised. Sir Syed wanted to be known as a serious modern historian with a scientific spirit of inquiry. In his quest, Sir Syed even went ahead and helped the British to concoct the myth of Indraprasth. You want to know how he did that? Sir Syed apparently found a brick which he precisely dated to 2607 BCE and took that as conclusive proof of the existence of Indraprasth. This was a time when archaeology was still a nascent discipline. None of those carbon dating or even the AMS dating, which gives a lot more precise dating, was even known very well about. It's anybody's guess how Sir Syed arrived at that exact date. But it worked for Sir Syed because that got him the membership of the Archaeological Society of Delhi, something that he really, really wanted. But back to the Qutb. Sir Syed included his 1852 paper, the one that he had presented to the Archaeological Society of Delhi, in his second edition of the Asar-us-Sanadid. Remember, the book that he so fondly wrote for Delhi and for its history and for its monuments. In his book, he also gave a set of reasons as to why he thought Qutb Minar predated Qutbuddin Aibak. One reason was the fact that the Qutb Minar was in fact a singular tower, as opposed to the fact that in most mosques you would often find two towers, a pair, sometimes even four. The other, of course, was that the Qutb was standing alone, solitary, and not really engaged with the mosque, which is how a lot of mosques are usually built in the subcontinent and elsewhere, with the towers engaged in the mosque. And lastly, the fact that the minar was decorated in bells. Bells. That's proof. On a side note, if that is not enough, Sir Syed was also the person who gave the misnomer to the mosque which is next to the Qutb Minar. he was the one who coined the term Quvvat al-Islam Mosque. Now the name Quvvat al-Islam actually means might of Islam. But you see, mosques, especially when they are alive and kicking, are never known by such names. They are simply called as the Jama Masjid, the congregational mosque, which is exactly what the mosque next to the Qutb would have also been known as. Now, because the term Quvvat al-Islam means the might of Islam, it sets a particular narrative of the mosque, that of power and conquest. Where did Sir Syed get this appellation for the mosque is a major mystery. The closest that one can think of is the term Qubbat al-Islam, which was the term given to the city of Delhi by the court chronicler of Iltutmish, Minhaj as-Siraj-Jani, who wrote the Tabaqat-e-Nasiri. Now you see, while Qubbat means might, Qubbat means sanctuary, a safe place, a sacred place. The term was used to describe Iltutmish's Delhi because during Iltutmish's time, Mongol invasions were ravaging the lands of Iran and Iraq, causing a lot of people to flee to areas unaffected by the Mongol invasions. Delhi was one such city, and Iltutmish wanted to market it as a safe place. How did the Qubbat of 13th century become the Qubbat of 19th century? Beats me. And the term Qubbat al-Islam wasn't even applied to the mosque by Jani. It was actually applied to the city. Sir Syed, what's happening? But. Coming back to the Qutb Minar. The first Director General of the ASI, the Archaeological Survey of India, a person called Alexander Cunningham, gave a blow-by-blow rebuttal to all the arguments put forth by Sir Syed in his paper. He first established, using several examples, that the Minar and Mosque model was indeed built often in the Islamic world, both before and after Aibak commenced the Qutb complex. In all these examples, there was a solitary Minar next to a congregational mosque, the Minar being used to call out the Azan, just like the Qutb. In order to prove that the model of the masjid with a solitary Minar next to it was an established feature in the Islamic world, Cunningham gave the example of the Tulunid Mosque and Minar, which, just like the Qutb Mosque and the Minar, featured a congregational mosque and a Minar next to it. As you can see here, the Tulunid Mosque was built by the Abbasid governor of Cairo, a person called Ahmad ibn Tulun. The complex was completed in 878 AD, and Ahmad Tulun, you guys, was quite the builder. Apart from having built this mosque and Minar complex, he also built a state-of-the-art Darushifa, a hospital in Cairo. This hospital also had separate bathhouses, separate hammams for both men and women. Didn't waste a breath, this guy. Stay on course, Ruchika. The Tulunid Mosque and Minar were inspired by an even earlier Minar and Mosque complex built by the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mutawakkil. In 851 AD, Al-Mutawakkil built the Grand Mosque of Samarra and the Minar next to it. The Minar had a very interesting architecture. As you can see over here, it's spiral, and which is why it was called Al-Minarat Al-Malviya. The word malv in Arabic meaning twisted, contorted, helical. Another fascinating example that Cunningham missed in his paper is that of the Kala Minar located next to the Kala Mosque in Bukhara, Uzbekistan, commissioned by the Karkhanid ruler Muhammad Arsalan Khan in 1127, approximately 70 years before Aibak even envisioned the Qutb Minar. And just like the Qutb, the Minar was situated next to the Jama Mosque and served the function of being a mazina, where the muezzin would give the call to azan from. Cunningham also mentioned how the Mosque Minar complex, built by Qutbuddin Aibak, also inspired the Mosque and Minar complex built in Kol. Built in 1252 AD by Ghiyasuddin Balban, the Wazir of the Delhi Sultan Nasir Mahmud, who was also the son-in-law of Balban. The Kol Minar, just like the Qutb, had a north-facing entrance and, as Cunningham noticed, was quite stylistically similar to the Qutb. Kol was what Aligarh, of course, was known as before 1804, which is when its name was changed to Aligarh. And I'd have a picture of the Minar right here for you guys to see. But of course, the people who wrote about it, the British, were the ones who destroyed it in the aftermath of the 1857 revolt. And this is not the only monument that they so wantonly destroyed in order to suppress the 1857 revolt. Many monuments were deliberately demolished. Look at the Red Fort. More than half of its palaces were decimated. Stylistically, the Minar resembled the two towers back home in Afghanistan for Aibak, one in Jam and the other in Sistan. Here's the minaret of Jam. And as you can see, both have an octagonal base, both taper with each succeeding story, and both have spiral staircases inside it that go all the way up to the summit. Of course, you would remember the inside of the Qutb, where Devanand and Nutan crooned, "Dil ka bhavar kare pukar, pyar ka rag suno, pyar ka rag suno re, hoo." I don't know what they sang at the Minaret of Jam, you guys. I don't have all the answers. Interestingly, as to the function of the Minaret of Jam, the scholars are divided. Patronized by Ghiyasuddin, the brother of Muizzuddin Ghur, Muhammad Ghuri, the Minar is said to have been constructed in 1186 AD to mark the victory of the Ghurids over the Ghaznavids. However, in their excavation report of 2004, David Thomas and others point to the existence of a courtyard paving next to the Minaret of Jam, which could possibly belong to a mosque and or a madrasa, which would then again make the Minaret of Jam a singular minar next to a mosque used as a mazina. Either way, in terms of date as well as stylistically speaking, this Minaret of Jam is the closest to Qutb. And it's quite clear that Aibak would have seen this back home and felt similarly inspired to build a similar structure in Delhi. And the bells. Ah yes, the bells. I haven't forgotten the bells, you guys. Cunningham wrote that the reason as to why the bells have been chosen to be the decorative motifs on the Qutb Minar was primarily because the Minar was built by local builders. These local builders were all well versed with the existing decorative motifs in the subcontinent, the kind of aesthetic that the subcontinent prescribed to at that point of time, and accordingly decorated the Minar with bells. However, one must pause here and reflect on the way in which this entire debate was carried out between Sir Syed and Cunningham. Note that there was a typecasting of two different kinds of architecture that could only be defined in one particular way. And that largely came from the idea of associating architectural forms with the religion of their patrons. It disregarded the fact that architecture, like all art form, blends and flows naturally. That there is a lot of borrowing and giving, a lot of evolution and growth, especially when it comes in contact with different architectural forms. It's art, you guys. You can't typecast it. You can't give it a religion. Same with the bells, right? It's a decorative motif, like the lotus motif, right? Which is ubiquitously present on every second monument in the subcontinent. And That's what's missing in the debate. A mature understanding of acculturation and coming together of art forms, but also the inability of both these critiques to comprehend the Qutb Minar outside the closeted narrative of which architectural form or religion do they belong to. But of course, they were not the only ones. That's how everything was being looked at in the 19th and 20th century. The Qutb, being the architectural marvel that it is, continued to be an inspiration. In 1634, it inspired Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan to build a similar structure in his hunting palace, built in modern-day Palam in Delhi. Called as the Hasht Sal Minar, this was, however, a shooting tower. And as you can see here, part of it was destroyed, as was a lot of the hunting palace, most of which, by the way, does not exist right now. A lot of encroachment, not really being maintained properly, etc. etc. Some scholars also regard the Qutb Minar as a victory tower. But it doesn't have to be an either-or situation. The Qutb could very well have both been a Mazina and a tower of victory. As a tower of victory, the Qutb inspired the Haft Minar in Mandu, Madhya Pradesh, which was built by Mahmud Khilji, one of the rulers of Malwa. The Haft Minar found a lot of praise in Jahangir's memoirs, Tuzuk-e-Jahangiri, when Jahangir went to visit Mandu. But of course, that is all that is left of the Minar. One does not really know when it was reduced to this state, because clearly, as the name Haft Minar suggests, it should have had 7 stories, which is also something that Jahangir attests to in his memoirs. What a marvel, the Qutb. Look at that, eh? So much complexity in the Qutb Minar's history, but in 2022, some random Ramesh will just go and stand in front of the Minar and be like, oh my god, I believe this is the Dhruv Stamp. No, random Ramesh, no. End to the oh. That is all that I have for you today. Please remember, if this sparks your curiosity, there is plenty more information that you could read about on the Qutb Minar and the mosque next to it and the entire Qutb complex by reading the articles and the books mentioned in the description box. And of course, do visit the Qutb Minar, you guys. And before you just walk away, please like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. And do let me know in the comments section what topic of history would you like me to talk about in the next video. See you.